How did the American Revolution play out in Britain? When many Americans think of the Revolutionary War, they think of Britain as a distant enemy trying to take away the freedom of the American people. However, before France became involved, the English simply thought of the American Revolution as just another civil war. More specifically, in England, the Revolution was seen as part of a larger struggle between British political factions. Many supported American complaints as being a plan for a return to the older forms of government. As the war dragged on, Britons began to see the rebellion in imperial terms. The American Revolution was thought of in Britain as a conflict between political factions. After the Glorious Revolution, England was again a Protestant nation, and when Queen Anne died, the House of Hanover came from Germany. They didn't enforce many rules on the colonies. Bonnie Prince Charles led the Jacobites and tried to defeat King George I and convert England back to Catholicism. Bonnie Prince Charlie recruited the Scottish to fight against King George II. He led the Highland chieftains into battle on the field of Culloden. Unfortunately, once they charged against the king's forces, they sunk deep into mud and bog. The troops were decimated, but Bonnie Prince Charlie escaped to the island of Skye. In 1756, the French occupied part of North America, and a group of Native Americans and George Washington massacred a French camp. This started the 7 Years' War, which set off a series of wars between France and England. After the war, Britain taxed America to fill the treasury. Samuel Adams described the Stamp Act. Itself was contrived with the design only to inure the people the habit of contemplating themselves as the slaves of men, and the transition thence to subjugation to Satan is mighty easy. When George III came to the throne, he changed from the political party of Whigs, the party of the Low Church Protestants, to be a Tory, the party of the High Church and Catholics. King George III then made Catholicism legal in the colonies with the Quebec Act. This made the Protestant colonies afraid that the king would try to convert them to Catholicism. Thus, the colonists were angry and more willing to fight against the throne. Many in Britain saw the American complaints as valid after the Quebec Act. They wanted to return to the past form of government, where the people were far more free. With tension running high between Catholics and Protestants, in 1780 the Gordon riots broke out over many of the same issues that the colonists had. After the removal of several laws formally restricting the colonists, the Gordon riots broke out. A more or less peaceful anti-Catholic protest suddenly turned into rioting and shooting across London. A crowd of 50,000 marched to Parliament demanding a petition. As Catherine O'Donnell explains, to many observers in England, the American Revolution and the Gordon riots emerged from a similar source. Later on, the war in Britain finally began to view the revolution in imperial terms. The stakes of the war were heightened for Britain after France joined forces with the rebels. France decided to aid the Americans because they wanted to weaken Britain, their rival. The Franco-American alliance, finalized in 1780, was a military pact between the French and the colonists, in which the French provided weapons and supplies. By 1780, the British also declared war on the Spanish and the Dutch. Alonzo Hamby points out, the combination of these European powers, with France in the lead, was a far greater threat to Britain than the American colonies standing alone. In Britain, the Revolutionary War was like a civil war between political factions, and a plea for past forms of government. However, as the war continued, it eventually began to be seen in imperial terms. Thank you.